Today we're going to look at the factored form of a quadratic function. So let's look at this property. It's called the zero product property. It states that if the product of two factors is zero, meaning that if you multiply two things together and you get zero, then at least one of the factors has to be zero. So if we look at these bottom examples, it says solve the quantity of x minus 5 times the quantity of 3x plus 1 equals 0. So they're saying that either this first factor, which is x minus 5, that has to equal 0, or this second factor, which is 3x plus 1, that has to equal 0. So you're just going to solve both of them for x. So on the first one, we would add 5, and x equals 5. Or, if we solve the second one, we would subtract 1. So 3x equals negative 1. Divide by 3. And x equals negative 1/3. So notice you have two answers here, x equals 5 or x equals negative 1/3. Same thing on the second example. It says the quantity of 2x minus 7 times the quantity of x plus 3 equals 0. So either this first factor, which is 2x minus 7, that would equal 0, or this second factor, which is x plus 3, that equals 0. So you're just going to solve each one. So on the first one, we would add 7. 2x equals 7. Divide by 2. 2 doesn't go into 7 evenly. So x equals 7 over 2. Or, if you solve the second one, you would subtract 3. And x equals negative 3. So notice once again you have two answers. Either x equals 7 over 2 or x equals negative 3. Okay, next we have some vocabulary. So it says the solutions to a quadratic equation are also called the zeros, which are also called the x-intercepts. So all three of these mean the exact same thing. So if you're talking about the solutions to an equation, or the zeros to the equation, or the x-intercepts, all of those mean the exact same thing. So if we're looking at these three problems that say solve x squared plus 3x plus 2 equals 0, or find the zeros of x squared plus 3x plus 2, or find the x-intercepts of x squared plus 3x plus 2 equals 0. These are all asking the exact same thing, so you would solve them the exact same way, which is going to be by factoring. So we have 4 steps that we're going to use when we solve a quadratic equation by factoring. So the first step is that the quadratic has to equal 0. And it has to be in standard form. Remember, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. And we're saying here that it has to equal 0. So it's going to look like that equation. Then we're going to factor, which is what we've been working on. Then we're going to set each factor equal to 0. And we're going to solve. So example 1 says solve x squared minus 4x minus 5 equals 0. So the first step was to set your equation equal to 0 and to make sure it's in standard form, which it is. It's set equal to 0 over here on this right-hand side. Then the second step says that we want to factor. So we have to factor x squared minus 4x minus 5. So that's a trinomial. So that means we're going to solve that using brute force. So we're going to say 1 times negative 5, which is negative 5. So our factors of 5 are just 1 and 5. Our middle term is negative 4. So that means that our bigger number is going to be negative. So now we're going to make two fractions. Our first number on top is going to be the number in front of x squared, which is 1. Then our bottom number is going to be our pair, so 1 and negative 5. Reduce if you can, but neither one of these can you reduce. So this first fraction becomes our first set of parentheses, which is 1x plus 1. Our second set of parentheses becomes our second fraction here, which is 1x minus 5. And we're going to set that equal to 0. So now this looks like that very first example. So we're going to set each factor equal to 0. So we're going to have x plus 1 equals 0. Or we're going to have the second one, which is x minus 5 equal to 0. Then we're going to solve. So the first one will subtract 1. So x equals negative 1. Or we'll add 5. And x equals positive 5. Example 2 says find the zeros of 2x squared plus 7x plus 1 equals negative 5. So find the zeros just means solve. So we're going to solve it just like we did example 1. So this one's not set equal to 0. So we have to make this set equal to 0. So we want to get rid of this negative 5. So the opposite of negative 5 is positive 5. So I'm going to add 5 to each side. So when we do that, this negative 5 plus 5, those cancel. That becomes 0. On the left-hand side, 1 plus 5 becomes 6. And then I'll just bring down the others in front. So 2x squared plus 7x plus 6. Now, we're just going to solve it by factoring. So once again, we have 3 terms. So this is brute force again. So we'll multiply. 2 times 6 is 12. So factors of 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. So we need the pair that adds together to give us 7, which is going to be 3 and 4. So we'll make our 2 fractions. The top, the numerator, is going to be whatever's in front of x squared, which is 2. The bottom's going to be your pair, which is 3 over 4. So reduce if you can. 2 over 3 doesn't reduce, so we'll leave that one alone. 2 over 4 does reduce, though, to 1/2. So our first set of parentheses would be 2x plus 3. Our second set is 1x plus 2. And we're just going to set both of these equal to 0 and solve. So subtract 3. So 2x equals negative 3. Divide by 2. So x equals negative 3 over 2. That's your first solution. First 0. Second one set equal to 0. Solve it. So subtract 2. 0 minus 2 is negative 2. So x equals negative 2. That's your second solution, or your second 0. Example 3 says find the x-intercepts of negative 8x minus 20 equals negative x squared. So finding the x-intercepts, finding the zeros, or solving all mean the exact same thing. So first step is that we need to set this equal to 0. So we need to get this negative x squared to the left side. So I'm going to add x squared to each side. So on this right-hand side, these will cancel, and that's going to become 0. On the left-hand side, none of these are like terms, so I'm just going to bring it down in descending order. So my x squared is going to go first, then this minus 8x, then this minus 20. So now we're going to solve using factoring. So we have a trinomial, so brute force again. So 1 times negative 20 is negative 20. So factors of 20 are 1 and 20. 2 and 10, 4 and 5. So we need negative 8 in the middle. So the bigger numbers are negative. So 2 and negative 10 are what we're going to use. So we'll make our 2 fractions. The number in front of x squared is your numerator. Your pair is your denominators. And neither one of those reduce. So this first fraction becomes 1x plus 2. We'll set that equal to 0. This second fraction doesn't reduce, so it becomes 1x minus 10. We'll set that equal to 0 as well. And then we'll solve. So subtract 2. So x equals -2 is your first x-intercept or solution, or 0. Solve the second one. So add 10, and x equals 10 is your second solution. Example 4 says solve 25x squared equals 16. So once again, this has to be set equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 16. On the right hand side, I'll get that equals 0. On the left hand side, those aren't like terms, so I'm just going to bring them both down. So 25x squared minus 16. That's supposed to be an x there. Okay, so this time we only have 2 terms, so that's not brute force, but these are both perfect squares. So we're going to do difference of squares here. So the square root of 25 is 5. Square root of x squared is x, so that's the first term in each. Square root of 16 is 4, so that's the second term in each. One's a minus, one's a plus. So now we can set both of those equal to 0. So the first one is 5x minus 4 equals 0. Second factor is 5x plus 4 equals 0. Then we'll solve. So if we'll add 4, which will give us 5x equals positive 4, divide by 5, so x equals 4 over 5. Solve the second one, 5x plus 4 equals 0. This time you'll subtract 4, which means that 5x equals -4. Divide by 5, and x equals -4 over 5. So last example says find the x-intercepts of x squared plus 11x equals 0. So once again, finding the x-intercepts or finding the zeros or just finding the solution all mean the same thing. So this one's already set equal to 0, so we're good there. So on the left-hand side, x squared plus 11x. So it's not a trinomial, so it's not brute force. And it can't be difference of squared because it doesn't have a minus. So all we're going to do on this one is take out a greatest common factor. So if you look, they both have the variable x. So I'm just going to factor out an x. Which means I'd have, if I started with 2x and I took out an x, that's going to leave me with an x. On the second one, I started with 11x and took out an x, so that leaves me with plus 11. Now, we're just going to set both of these factors equal to 0. That means x equals 0. Notice there's nothing to solve there, so x equals 0, or the second factor is x plus 11 equals 0. So here we would subtract 11, and x equals -11, which is your second solution.